Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to have an in-depth look through the DPS tables. While nothing much has changed through rebalances as such as we have had through previous seasons, as actually there haven't been any at all, which is kind of sad. But there have been new additions to it, and while we have discussed each of those separately, things like the Caretaker, the Huntsman, the Pahan, other things like that, I do want to go through them once again, and while going through them as well, I will give my recommendations on which weapons I recommend within that weapon class and what talents I recommend. For that, of course, as always, we'll be using the DPS tables, a link to the folder and also to each separate file, of course, as always. So yeah, you can jump around. I'll also timestamp everything so you can jump to a specific weapon category if that is what you want to look at. So yeah, let's go get started with the main table. And we'll start here indeed with the main burst and sustain table. That is the main 0.0 file in there. When we go in there and go onto the first tab, because yeah, it's actually important, there is multiple tabs down here going to SMG, LMG, rifle, shotguns, pistols, MMRs. And yeah, those are at the bottom as I work with spreadsheets. We'll zoom in for a second. I just want to discuss here quickly that, yeah, you kind of have to look at these burst and sustain tables with a little bit of knowledge about what, for instance, this -1 mod means. In this case, yeah, the -1 mod means that this weapon has 1 mod slot less, meaning that versus other weapons, it is actually going to lose a little bit of crit chance or crit damage, depending on what mod we go with. It could also be even handling, of course, but in the cases of here, we're kind of discussing them in the forms of damage. And that means that while the FT1000 here and the Honey Badger here are ahead of the FAMAS, in a little bit, when we go on build, they aren't anymore. And yeah, that's an important thing to know. That's also why we have the on build ones. And then these ones are especially here just to kind of discuss the base versions of them. Here we can kind of compare, for instance, the FAMAS versus the Fall or something, which has the same amount of mods. But yeah, when the mods change, yeah, we have to kind of take it to on build. Then as well, the exotics are, yeah, a separate story because the exotics have, of course, exotic talents. So here I'm kind of separating them out. I'm just not just throwing them together with the other weapons because they just don't line up in that way, because all of these other weapons can have their whatever talent they want. That's also why you will see the Lexington on the first side here, because they have the same. They have... it's a base weapon that doesn't have a fixed talent. It isn't like the Caretaker or the Huntsman, where yeah, it is a specific talent tied to them. Here, yeah, they can't have any talent, so they show up here. The only real addition to this list is actually, of course, in the LMG category, where we see because things as we discussed, the Huntsman and the Caretaker and such, and Lud and Purist, they don't show up actually, of course, into the main tables here because they are basically a named version of a Mark 16 or a named version of a G36 or a named version of FAMAS. The Pahan, though, the Pahan is here, and yeah, here with 4 stacks in the sustain end of things, or here in the sustain end of things as we have it. I've added it in with 4 stacks just to kind of, yeah, keep it a little bit closer to the rest. If we put this at 0 stacks, yeah, it kind of falls close to Pestilence numbers on the sustain end. Now, of course, it is not going to always be on those 4 stacks and such, but that's always the case with these as well. Especially the exotics, we kind of have to look at them on build. But what we can have here with the Pahan is that we can actually compare it a little bit on its burst, but here again, the mods aren't included here. So the Pestilence, for instance, has a 10% rate of fire mod, the blue screen has a 20% rate of fire mod. That will kind of push these, you know, in different versions. The Ironling has 10 crit chance, 20 crit damage, all of those isn't accounted here. Here's well, the Pahan has 15 crit chance and 15 weapon damage. So those numbers will kind of shift in a second, but this is especially here for the base values of them. Let's actually already go and start looking at the ARs. And we'll start here with the ARs and also kind of give the short explanation of, like, you have to, when we're looking at these talents, make the judgment of how much uptime there is there. I'm not really doing any... I'm not putting any numbers here, for instance, for how much Sadist is going to be active for you if you're running it. This is just Sadist active. Same for Killer, it's when it's active. Now, one thing we can say is that especially things like Killer and such, we can pretty consistently trigger them. Sadist, if we're just running it without any outside help, so no ODs in the team or something, you're generally triggering it every other kill, every other 2 kills because of the talent, which will also give a bleed. Or you could be running maybe a Stinger Hive and bleeding a little bit more. So yeah, it really depends on a lot of things, but you wouldn't generally do that anyway. So some talents are a little bit more consistent and some talents are a little bit more inconsistent. So we have to make some judgment calls there on these things. Talking on the talent end, we can, just to keep it also not going way too long, especially on ARs, yeah, Killer, Streamline, Measured. That's kind of the 3 go-tos. Sadist, situationally ignited, even situationally. But Killer is kind of, when it is active, it is pretty high up there. It doesn't cost as much as Streamline. Streamline costs a little bit more, but yeah, especially here on a red build, it is a little bit behind Killer. Still very effective, but it costs you your skills, which is sometimes a bit too big of a price to pay. Then Measured is kind of our floor, because Measured is kind of always active. It doesn't have anything that we don't need to get a kill or such. It just is on the weapon, and everything below that, which will include Optimus, Strain, and stuff like that, without special situations. Because, for instance, yeah, with this global event or with this global modifier of this season, we can get a lot more crit chance, and now Strained might actually exceed Measured when your active is active, but that's also temporary, of course. With just the 70 crit chance, yes, Measured is still kind of ahead of Strained, for instance. Another one that we can kind of discuss, especially for LMGs and ARs, and of course rifles, is Ranger. Here with ARs, though, I tend to not be in the ranges that Ranger would need to be to consistently be ahead of Measured or such. So my go-tos are definitely Killer and then Measured, especially. Streamline, though, is definitely a contender if you are okay with giving up your skills. Weapons-wise, we'll look actually at the Sadist end, and we'll kind of use the Sadist end to compare basically the list of the weapon end, because Sadist is just a plus 30%, so it still kind of keeps them in order, because some of the weapons will kind of matter. If for instance, with a -1 mod, Killer is a little bit more effective because you have less crit chance, crit damage in total. So that then kind of, Killer gains more and percentually. Here, it's a flat 30% on everything. So yeah, the Lexington, the FAMAS, the Fall, the CTAR, that's kind of my top picks. The F2000 is kind of in there as well. The Lexington is definitely the top pick. It is the higher burst and sustain than basically anything in this category, which it's kind of annoying because it's a little bit too good. Handling wise is also way better than some of the other contenders here. The FAMAS definitely is a really pretty accurate gun, but it kind of lacks a little bit on the stability end. You have to recoil compensate quite a bit. The Fall is a little bit better handler, but it is a lower RPM. Even though, yeah, it does sustain quite a bit better. It handles quite a bit better as well. The CTAR is also in there for that same reason. The CTAR gives up a little bit damage versus the FAMAS. The sustain end of things is basically the same between them. And what you gain here is the accuracy is around the same, or basically the same, but yeah, the recoil compensation you need to do is a lot easier. So the CTAR, because of that, is a contender as well. And then the F2000 is also in that pack. If you kind of need a faster firing with a long rail, so for instance, with the cases of Heartbreaker or such, the P416 and the M4 and the Honey Badger are kind of that, because yeah, the Fall is a little bit too low on the RPM. But that is very specific cases, of course. They're kind of the B tier here, the P416, the M4, and the Honey Badger. On the exotic ends, we have to kind of watch out, again, with exotic talents, because here we're kind of discussing Strega, for instance, with 3, 4, 5 stacks. You don't start with 3, 4, or 5 stacks. You have to make that happen. And while you're making that happen, you're way below, of course. Same for the Chameleon. With the body active, it's doing really well. With everything active, it's doing really, really well. But you still have to activate it and keep it active. Now, in both of these cases, situationally, you can make that happen. For instance, with the Strega, with activities, yeah, you can make multiple kills happen. They're all pretty close to each other. So when they spawn, the marks will start moving around, and then you will have multiple enemies that you might kill with 3, 4, or 5 stacks. The Chameleon, same actually, but then more so, for instance, in missions and stuff. There's a lot of fights that are under 45 seconds. If you are under 45 seconds, it will actually reset it will reset back to full after a fight if you have already triggered it. And that's actually a really strong thing about the Chameleon. Some of the other standouts are actually the Bighorn, I would say is definitely a top pick. I would say the Lud, as has come in with Streamline, I wouldn't pick it over some of the higher weapons with just normal Streamline. But then as well, the exotics-wise, the Capacitor, if we find that down here, is of course a contender when we have a few, well, in this case, for instance, with Technician, with just one skill tier on top, it really works well. Especially if you're pushing it into multiple skill tiers, the Capacitor very quickly becomes the top pick, and that's kind of the go-to there. Then also what we have is the Eagle Bearer and the St. Elmo's. I would say the Eagle Bearer is, well, kind of fun, and once in a while it's okay to run around with, and you can, if you're making the talent sing and yeah, you're getting the 3 kills and negating deaths, basically, it works out really well. But what often happens to me is, yeah, I'll take a lot of damage, I'll make 2 kills, and then I'll make a 3rd kill, which is me. As I'll drop dead from the damage that I didn't negate by not getting that 3rd kill. So yeah, the Eagle Bearer is gonna like that. It is high risk, high reward gameplay, but because of that, it can be quite fun. Damage end-wise, though, yeah, it really doesn't make that much sense, especially now that we have weapons like, yeah, with Measured, with Killer. It is especially the increase to Measured and Killer that has made a lot of exotics that aren't damage-oriented fall a little bit behind, especially if they don't have the mods to make up for it. Some weapons have the mods to make up for it. It used to be the case, for instance, with the St. Elmo. The St. Elmo is so low nowadays that, yeah, it really isn't a contender for me. Well, it is a really handy handler because, yeah, it is an M4, which handles already really well, and also on top of it has weapon handling mod. It just gives up way too much in damage. One thing I want to point out here, because yeah, a lot of people go like, oh, just the St. Elmo still does really good on the sustain end. It does decent on the sustain end, but especially when we're comparing it, because at the bottoms here, yeah, we have first the burst list and then the sustain list on all of these. So yeah, do scroll down and actually check the sustain end of things as well. What we have there is for instance, if we actually go and find the ST dot Elmo, it is, even on the sustain end of things, pretty far down. And especially if we kind of compare it to, let's say, Lexington with Killer active. Now, of course, the Lexington needs to get that kill to activate Killer. But yeah, they're around the same sustain. But on the burst end, of course, it is so much ahead. So this is kind of the Elmo is, I haven't been using it much, and there's good reason for that. Let's move on to the SMGs. Actually, one quick one before we go to the SMGs, because yeah, we do have 2 new additions in here, of course. And that is that, yeah, Huntsman is in here. Huntsman here with Frenzy, always active. Now, as we saw, after the first mag, we can kind of keep it going as long as we have a target to actually absorb all of that damage, of course. And because of that, it does work out pretty well. But what we saw as well is if we just move it up to an LMG, we get so much more out of Frenzy. And that's kind of my thing with the Huntsman. I feel I would much rather just run Frenzy on an LMG. What we have as well is the Caretaker, and both of these as well have their own videos, so do watch those if you want to go much more in depth. But just to discuss the Caretaker here briefly, here it's next door to a Lexington with Killer, and then of course the Caretaker with Perfect Killer. The Caretaker being in G36 when Killer isn't active. If we scroll all the way down to no talents here on the DPS end of things, the no talent is basically when Killer isn't active. That's the same as no talent. This is specifically no damage talent because, yeah, it's just nothing affecting the damage on the weapon, because it could be preservation or, you know, future perfect or stuff like that. But then here, the Lexington is all the way up here, and the G36 is all the way down here. So when we're comparing them against each other when they're inactive, they're pretty far apart. But yeah, when Killer is activated, they kind of land up around the same numbers. Now, handling-wise as well, the Lexington is much better. But then this becomes more the question of, do you have a Lexington? Because a lot of us, or a lot of people don't. Even as somebody who does have it, I hope at some point they just pull the Band-Aid off and just put it in the loot pool, put it into somewhere where we can kind of farm for it or something. Let's get people getting it. Don't just keep one of the best weapons time gated. Because now as well, the caretaker is kind of time gated as well, because yeah, it was just part of that project. That project is not done, the Game Pass project. So you can't get the caretaker now anymore either. So yeah, it's kind of annoying. But the caretaker, at least if you did get it and you didn't have a Lexington, is a really good pick here as well. Now let's really go to the SMGs. And on the SMG, and it's kind of the same story. We'll kind of talent-wise, just bang that out right away. It is killer, streamlined, and measured that I go with quite a bit. Then in the SMG category, unwavering is definitely one of the contenders. We'll see that actually in a little bit in the sustain end, because it is a sustain talent, of course. It is on weapon swap. You get a very big amount of weapon handling for a decent amount of time. Now, here again, yeah, killers, streamlines, and measures are kind of my go-tos, and measured as kind of a general use talent that will generally give you the amounts, just a pretty decent increase without much of conditionality. You just gotta get used to that RPM swaps. On the weapon pick ends, these two top bursters are definitely my go-tos. The Tac Vector and the SMG9 is the ones I lean towards the most. On burst, they're pretty close to each other, with the SMG9 kind of following the Tac Vector and then leading the Tac Vector on the sustain end of things. Both of them aren't great sustainers, but they're not horrible, because especially the Tac Vector, even though it has a tiny mag, it actually has a decent reload that makes up for that quite a bit. If you need a long rail, a Vector 45 can make a lot of sense as well. Then when we need to discuss the Dark Winter with Perfect Killer, of course, here we have the Tac Vector with Normal Killer. Both of them are, again, kind of as we discussed just a second ago with the Caretaker, they're kind of pretty close to each other when the talent is active, but that means that they're pretty far apart, because they are pretty far apart when the talent is inactive. But the Dark Winter, of course, can be somewhat more easily obtained, or more consistently at least, than trying to farm out a Tac Vector. Because if you just get this from a named cache or such, you just put an detoc on it and you're kind of there. Where, for instance, with a Tac Vector, you might want one that is free talentable. If you're going to optimize it, you might as well find one that is free talentable, and that can actually be a harder farm than trying to get the Dark Winter. So if you have a Dark Winter, it's fine. But if you're kind of min-maxing, I'm kind of been going with Tac Vectors with Killer. A lot of the other weapons in this category are pretty far behind it. And that makes it that, yeah, things like the MP7, MPX, Banshee that used to be picks definitely aren't, since the rebalances. I'm very much leaning towards the Vectors, specifically the Tac Vector and the SMG9. This is then also one of those where the SMG9 is actually much better than the SMG9A2, or well, not much better, but if you're picking between the two, the one with the one mod less, with it, which in the past we would always basically exclude those because they didn't have enough compensation in the base. When they did that one big rebalance, they actually changed that. Now it's basically the inverse. It is the MG5 or the Infantry MG5, which for instance has a mod less. The SMG9 in this case versus the A2, which has one mod less, is better. And same, for instance, for the 6CQB, 6716 CQB versus the 6716. All of those where the one mod less, generally they have enough compensation nowadays to make up for that. So we generally go with those. And then as well, the purest actually is then one place where, yeah, it is a SMG9A2, but it is because of that talent being so much better, or enough better, it is ahead of the SMG9. But then this would also mean if you're running SMG9 with a Streamline, when Streamline is inactive, that difference of course flips, because yeah, here when it's active is ahead, but when it, like, you know, the gap of the talent is smaller. So, but of course with Streamline you're trying to keep perfect uptime generally, because otherwise it's not worth using anyway. You just don't use your skills and go that way. That makes the purist definitely a pick here. Then also we should go to the exotics. The exotics, if we kind of look here, kind of with like the ARs, we have a bunch of exotics at the top of the list, but most of them not per se practical. So for instance, yeah, here we have the backfire with 100 stacks, and this is of course a backfire just at full stacks on a build, on the striker build that is on full stacks, and also a striker build that isn't made for it. There is this other one with HZB in the name. That one is made for it. That is the one that is fully hazard protected, and we can see that actually that one still actually performs really well, especially this season with the extra crit chance. Backfire is really performing well. But Backfire was already really a good pick for certain situations, but it's very situational. I wouldn't use this as a general use weapon, but for instance, in Incursion, what a lot of people are running nowadays is a full Red Striker with the Backfire. The healer is kind of helping keep the hazard protection or make the bleed even shorter, and then also healing it up. But also, once you reach 100 stacks, if you keep reloading at 100 stacks, it's only the first reload that seems to bleed you, and then you don't bleed afterwards, making it so that the Backfire actually can be used even with a full red build in certain situations, like the Lovebirds, like right in the Incursions. Those fights really fitted well, and there it really does shine. The other one that has always been a standout here, and I feel kind of is forgotten, but it's a Chatterbox. And the Chatterbox, even with 3 stacks, which reloading with 3 enemies within the 15 meters is definitely doable, and then you can kind of keep it going, especially on damaging builds. You would want to keep enough damage up that, especially solo, that you can just get multiple kills. Doing activities and such with the Chatterbox works out pretty well. And yeah, you don't even need the 4 and the 5 stacks for it to be really up there. But yeah, generally, even if you're doing 3 stacks, you're doing pretty well with it. The downsides of it is, of course, yeah, you do need decent accuracy with it, just to land those hits and, you know, not waste too many rounds, because with every kill you do get some ammo back, of course, but yeah, it's kind of dependent on how much ammo you expended to get the kill. And then also, yeah, we should note that the handling wise, these two are pretty close to each other. There aren't many standouts here handling wise. I would say definitely the MP7 is one that handles quite a bit better, but I wouldn't really put them up against the SMG9 or the Attack Vector. I would just more so close up the range and use these. Then we also have the Lady Death. Well, the Lady Death, when it is active, seems pretty high up here, up in the list. The downside of it is that when it's inactive, we have to go all the way to the bottom of the burst list. And yeah, it is literally at the bottom. That the same goes actually for a lot of other weapons when you're low on stacks. Even so, for instance, yeah, even with the Chatterbox, if you're just keeping it on 1 stack, it's not that great. And that's kind of the thing, again, that we have to kind of consider is the uptime on some of these talents. One we went past as well is the Oxpecker. The Oxpecker doesn't perform that great. It doesn't have the damage talent, and yeah, because of that, it hurts a little. On the sustain end, we have that talent I was talking about earlier, Unwavering. Unwavering can make for a really fast reload. Because of that, it works out really well on the sustain end. But especially as a secondary, if you're using the SMG as a secondary and you're swapping to it, Unwavering is a really good talent. It gives you several very quick reloads because of the weapon handling increases, but also makes for a very accurate weapon that you can really use to pinpoint your enemies and just tear them up. Even though it doesn't add on the damage end, of course, yeah, it adds a lot on the sustain end, and because of that, it pumps up the numbers here quite a bit. And yeah, makes for a really good talent and well worth considering alongside of the rest. Yeah, let's take it on to the LMGs. And on this LMG one, we have Frenzy here showing up. We saw it a little bit ago on Huntsman being the only AR that has Frenzy. And yeah, Frenzy can add a lot of damage, but it's not per se realistic to kind of compare with those. That's also why there's always this green arrow. Sometimes I exclude some weapon types or talents. We're basically comparing this as the 100% point as one of the places where I feel is the first place where we can really say that this talent can happen like this, because especially these frenzies, this GR9 with a pouch, 250 rounds, you have to unload the 250 rounds to reach this frenzy. It's not realistic in a lot of places, but you could prep it, have it ready, and then have it go at these numbers for 9 seconds, having 9 seconds of this burst DPS. And that can make for very impressive moments. But yeah, for general play, it definitely isn't there. What I would say, though, is that as we kind of saw with the Huntsman video where I went into Frenzy as well, the M249 / Mark 46 really works well nowadays with Frenzy. Sleipnir no longer really does. So yeah, those two, they've kind of swapped places for me. The M249 just timing-wise, because they changed it from 5 to 9 seconds on the Frenzy, yeah, that fits the Mark 46 / M249 pretty well. Of those as well, the Mark 46 is better than the M249 Para and the M249B as the 3 variants in that. If we kind of move it down here, actually on the LMG category here, we can kind of include Sadist, because Sadist gets used, at least I use it quite a bit, especially for instance the Carnage, with OD, where we're kind of keeping that uptime on Sadist going quite a bit. The Negev is one of the worst handlers in this category, but yeah, it makes up for it by its extra damage. The Negev damage-wise is pretty much up there, but yeah, the handling of it is definitely the worst. We can also see the RPK and the L86 do show up here, but yeah, they're not realistic. Their reloads happen way too often because their max size isn't that big. Also, we have to look at, in these parentheses, the BM on the RPK and the L86 implies big mag, which is just the plus 20 round minus 10% reload. But then with all of the pouch LMGs, we can either go rate of fire mag, gaining plus 5% rate of fire, or we can go with the MG, or for instance, what we have here with the MG5, with a pouch. With the MG5 as well, I'm just going with the pouch because I don't think a 50-round MG5 makes much sense. But a 100-round Mark 46 we could make it make sense. Because here as well, for instance, if we put a 100-round M249 or Mark 46 up against an MG5 with that rate of fire mag versus a pouch mag, both of them have 100 rounds. But of course, the reload on that M249 is much longer. This is also one of those places where, yeah, if we're just looking at burst, the MG5 here with the pouch is actually, of course, behind. Not by a lot, though. We are just a percent difference, a little bit over a percent difference, at least to the RPK we're comparing. But on the sustain end of things, this is 120%, this is 102%. This is way ahead on the sustain end. And this is also why we always have to kind of look at sustain end of things. If the burst is kind of equivalent, but the sustain is so much higher on one weapon, unless there is severe handling issues or other issues with that weapon, yeah, then I'm going to lean towards that weapon. And that's exactly what happens here. On the talent end, let's discuss that first. Yeah, Frenzy is very much a pick, of course. Sadist, especially Perfect Sadist. On the LMGs as well. OD is kind of... on OD, LMGs is my go-to. Carnage, especially there, but of course in the future we'll have the Tinkerer come in, and especially with OD that makes quite a difference. Then again, Killer, Streamlined, and Measured show up here as well. That's kind of, yeah, my picks here, and especially, yeah, Measured or Killer or Streamlined as general use talents, and then Frenzy for specialized moments, or like for a secondary that you're prepping. Then on the weapon pick end, if we kind of keep it to the Sadist here, yeah, the MG5 with a pouch is kind of my go-to. The reload is really AR-like nowadays, and yeah, makes up for it. But especially if we're kind of then comparing it to M249 with a 150 round mag with the pouch, then yeah, the burst kind of falls behind there, but yeah, the sustain actually catches up a little bit. Here we also have 150 rounds, of course. Both of these are also pretty similar in handling. The Negev is also up there, but the Negev handles so much worse. So really, only for the Carnage, I do pick it, but for everything else, I don't lean towards the Negevs. And yeah, the RPKs and the L86s, while really high on the burst and seem decent, their sustain, even though their sustain doesn't seem that bad compared to all of these, that reload being that long and that often really just makes it, yeah, unfun to play is kind of a way to describe it. One that a lot of people like as well is the GR9. I would say the GR9 really drops off a lot of damage, because if we're kind of looking at the Sadist GR9 here, rate of fire, it is next to an MG5 with pouch with Killer active. Now, GR9, especially with steady-handed, that makes a lot of sense to me, but especially on the damage end of things, it really is lacking, because, yeah, if we're basically dropping a whole level of talent, and yeah, the MG5 is ahead of it. Also, nowadays with the MG5, yeah, having that fast of a reload, yeah, the reload side of things for the LMGs, I'm just going to lean towards that. If we take it to the sustain end of things first, before we look at the exotics, we have the steady-handed, which is also definitely a pick. But even here, if we're comparing a GR9 with steady-handed, I'm just going to actually go Control F steady, just to find them. GR9 with rate of fire mag, yes, there, with steady-handed. The Bullet King is actually ahead of it. This is one of those things that, yeah, the Bullet King has gotten buff after buff, well, 2 times. First, change from the third stats, being able to change it to become crit chance or rate of fire really makes a difference there. And then as well, nowadays it is 15 crit chance, what used to be 5 crit chance from mods. And that means that actually the steady-handed ones don't make too much sense to me anymore. But if you do, because yeah, there's a handling thing to be said here, because the Bullet King isn't a Gev, and yeah, as we talked about, handling horrible. This, of course, with steady-handed as well, you're getting accuracy and stability as you're going. That can make a really big difference. But if you're doing that, do it with a rate of fire mag. 200 rounds is enough to trigger steady-handed. You don't need 250. Don't put pouches there. Because yeah, when we drop it to a pouch, we're dropping to, well, behind my head, we're dropping quite a bit. We're going, yeah, quite a bit lower on there. A GR9 with a rate of fire mag at least can be close enough to a Bullet King to have the accuracy stability make a difference. But actually nowadays, yeah, the Bullet King is kind of the sustain king again. Handling wise though, yeah, it is a little lacking. Having discussed that's exotic, let's actually take it to the exotics. Here though, with the ARs and SMGs, we have a lot of exotics here at the top. We don't have that anymore. These exotics don't have that great damage talent. Some of them have decent mods and stuff, but yeah, they don't keep up. Here, for instance, the Bahan is kind of in the area of, if we try to find, let's find an MG5. Actually, yeah, we have their Optimist. So we have Optimist MG5 here. That's kind of the damage level that Pahan is at in general. Here with the rate of fire and crit chance, and also in the middle of that, the Iron Lung. While the Iron Lung performs pretty well, it still doesn't have a damage talent. And yeah, those killers, those measures, those streamlines, they add quite a bit. Now, of course, here we're adding as well the fire on top, which we aren't actually including into this, but the fire isn't per se there for the damage, it's much more for the CC of it. So you do have that. But yeah, the Bahan here doesn't compete, for instance, well. On the sustain it can a little bit more. Here though as well, we're having it at multiple, that's why the 3 versions here, there's it's coming in with 0 stacks, 2 stacks, 4 stacks. But that, of course, for the burst end of things means nothing. The burst is just the RPM times the damage. The magazine isn't included in that. That's why we do sustain calculations. The Pestilence here, and as well with 1 full stacks, is actually even below them. This is now on a striker build, of course, that big, the tick isn't that big. One of the things I find, and that's the nice thing, especially about the Lengmo version of this, once you push the tick above 1 million-ish, especially, for instance, on that, it's around 1.5 million with good grading on top and such. Then, because, for instance, even an elite is around just under 10 million health and armor, it will do, of course, 10 stacks or 10 ticks of 1, basically. So if you're above 1 million, it will even kill elite and jump to the next one. And when it jumps to the next one, it'll be put back at full refresh rate. That's also why I'm not a big fan of strikers with LMG or with pestilences. But when you move it to a Lengmo version where the tick is so much bigger, now the tick can by itself move around and even kill elites. And because of that, it will just, once it is high enough, it will keep killing until it either runs out of people to jump to, or like, for instance, in control points, if a named spawns, it might not be able to kill that one. But yeah, just using it as damage, and here as well, with a full stack of damage of the tick going around, yeah, the Pestilence still doesn't like reach the levels of an MG5 with killer or such. And then as well, even lower than that, as I'm trying to find, yeah, the Bullet King and the blue screen, both of those, while effective because of other traits, yeah, they're not damage kings, really. I've seen the blue screen pop up a lot recently. The 20% rate of fire mod really does help it quite a bit, but yeah, it's kind of in the Bullet King area. Now, of course, here though, the blue screen on top of it is doing, you know, CC and such, and disruptions and, you know, disorients and stuff like that. So there is utility there. And that's also why I would say that generally, like if you're going Bullet King, I would maybe lean blue screen, unless you really need the Bullet King specifically for like its infinite fire ability, which, for instance, in Iron Horse and stuff gets used in that way. But yeah, actually the blue screen being just kind of tied with it, I would lean much more towards that. On the burst end at least. But yeah, on the sustain end, we see that, as we already saw, the Bullet King being much higher than them. So yeah, in the exotics, in the LMG category, there are a few interesting ones, but none of them is really top contenders the way that we saw in ARs or SMGs. Let's go on to the next one, and that is, of course, the rifles. Here with the rifles, we're also moving away from strikers. All the other ones were on striker builds. This one is on a high-end build. This is with a coyote, a gift, a sacrifice, and then 2 pieces via, one being an eagle's grasp on a holster and gloves, and then the knee pad being a fox's prayer. On this as well, yeah, we're kind of moving away then. On strikers, our damage numbers are dropping down, but of course, we're all comparing all these weapons on that same build. One of the things with rifles is they're not in a really good place. That 17 crit damage really hurts them as their second stat, so compared to the 21 DTH of ARs or even the 21 crit chance of SMGs, they're way behind. And they're kind of balanced on their base numbers around the same. But yeah, once you put it on build, and we're accounting then as well for the second stat of the weapons, yeah, it really falls apart. Also, I would say if you're going for a rifle build, generally OD or Umbra or Negotiator, all three of those make for really good rifle builds, much more so than Aces or Breaking Point. But the rifles aren't the top picks for those builds. An Umbra with a rifle doesn't make for a good Umbra build. It's just if you want to run a rifle, you can run Umbra or Negotiator or OD. Because yeah, rifles are just not in a great space right now. Highlight all the sadists here as well, and talent picks to discuss those first. Sadists can actually work out, as we talked a second ago. OD actually a decent pick for rifles, and yeah, because of that, you can run sadists with them. Then killer, of course, just kind of being agnostic towards other parts. It just needs the kill, and yeah, the rifles can make the kill happen. We of course don't have measured here because yeah, measured not available for this these types of weapons. But then what we do have is rifleman and boomerang. And of course, as well, ranger. With rifles, we're moving up a little bit also in our optimal range, but also in effective range, we can actually engage enemies at the longer ranges. Because of that, ranger also makes a lot more sense here. Even though on ARs and LMGs, it also kind of makes sense if you are engaging at longer ranges here and there. But yeah, rifleman and boomerang especially coming in. What we'll see here is that rifleman, especially at 5 stacks, can compete kind of with killer. But yeah, that's a big ask, of course. This is 5 headshots, that's just 1 kill. 1 or 2 kills, depending if you get the activation to go. But yeah, you're likely to get killer going pretty consistently, especially if you are just doing something where you can get kills. But then rifleman actually can work for places where you're not getting kills, but there is a head for you to shoot, and you can get the stacks up and then get the damage and then continuously keep firing at the head. So rifleman really does work well for that. For boomerang, though, we'll likely have to actually go pretty low. I'm going to actually Control F boomer. And yeah, okay, boomer, you're down here. The M16A2 being one of the top bursters, or the top burster in this category. So this is the first boomerang, and it's kind of in the same areas as some of the other weapons, lower weapons even than it, with Strained and Optimist. And actually, yeah, it is quite, because especially as well, boomerang isn't just a burst talent, it also is a sustain talent. It increases the mag effectively from the weapon, because it's returning rounds to the mag whenever it triggers. So yeah, boomerang, not the biggest damage pick, but can be a utility and a sustain pick there. If we take it back up to the top, and actually I'm going to remove my search there and go back to the top. So yeah, talent-wise, killer, rifleman, boomerang, can make a lot of sense. Streamline, of course, as well here. Sadist as well, if you're running it with OD or if you're running it alongside of OD or such. Then on the weapon end of things, the M16 here is not fully auto. Most of the other weapons here are, so if you just hold down the button with most of the other ones, except the 1886, although I think the 1886, yeah, it's way lower on the burst end of things. Because especially as well, keep in mind, we're using here DPS as our metric. Something like the 1886, really good for headhunting, but there the base damage is the most important value, except for if there's like really other bad things around it. if the handling is too horrible or such, we might drop down maybe one in the base damage, but there the base damage matters most. On the burst and sustain end, yeah, the rest of it kind of matters. The M16, though, yeah, isn't full auto, and because of that, you can't really keep this RPM up. Even with a macro, you're gonna lose a little bit versus some of these other weapons. But it's still a very high contender just because it has that burst there, especially if we're kind of looking at it versus some of my picks. Because the M1As, here the M1A CQB and the SOCOM, this one can kind of be disregarded because of its very low sustain. Its sustain is so low because it is a tiny mag that, while reloads quickly, needs to be reloaded often, and because of that kind of fades away. Also, handling wise, the M1A CQB is pretty bad. The classic M1A is a little bit better in handling, but still kind of doesn't compete well on the sustain end of things against, especially my pick, which is the Mark 17 and the 61716 CQB. Both of those are pretty good bursters, better on the sustain end and then both of those. And especially the Mark 17, I would say, handles pretty well. It isn't the best handler in here. That, of course, goes down to the UIC, but the UIC also gives up a lot of damage to do so. I would say especially the Mark 17 and the 6 CQB are kind of my go-tos. Some of the other rifles in here, like the MDR and the ACRSS, the Lightweight M4, LVOAC, all of those are handling-wise significantly worse, and they pull up a lot more, and you need to recoil compensate a lot more than, for instance, with a Mark 17. That's why the Mark 17 has been kind of my go-to. And while the classic M1A can kind of compete in handling of it, just because it fires so slow, I feel the drop in sustain is actually pretty high. Plus, actually, yeah, putting some more rounds out means that you can you can just kind of more spam fire. With the classic M1A, I feel you even while you're holding the button down, you try to be much more. It's trying to, like, you just don't go for the weak points and stuff, because if you miss, you're wasting quite a bit. Having more shots go out can be a benefit in that way. But yeah, the big difference to the Mark 17 isn't that big as well in the RPM ranges. So that's kind of my high-end picks, especially the Mark 17, the 6 CQB. The rest of the here, I wouldn't per se pick. One notable one is the UIC. The UIC handles really, really well. Has low RPM, but it also has low damage, but low burst, but decent sustain. But especially its handling is very standout in this category. But I would rather have the damage of a Mark 17, honestly. On the exotic ends, we can kind of be brief, because especially the Vindicator and the Merciless, even though they're kind of at the top here, yeah, these are, again, with 100% uptimes on them. The Vindicator, of course, marks enemy body parts, and you have to hit that body part. If the legs are behind cover, if the enemy is standing up in front, you can't hit that. And then, especially both of them, I believe, are very much towards the bottom when the talent isn't being utilized. So yeah, the Vindicator, with it being inactive, the Merciless, with it being not active, it is very much towards the bottom. And if you get perfect uptime out of them, then they're quite up here. But the reality is, of course, kind of more in the middle. And when you drop into the middle, why not just go with a Mark 17 with Killer, like down there? Or Rifleman, or such. One standout as well is the Artist Tool, actually. In between the exotics, we'll discuss that one, because it has perfect Rifleman, of course. We can get 6 stacks out of that, and yeah, it being on a 6 CQB, one of the better picks, I like it quite a bit. And that one is definitely one of the go-tos, especially if you want to go Rifleman anyway. Going back to the exotics, the Diamondback, of course, we're kind of using that more in a headhunter way. That's more also in the category of the 1886s and such. And because of that, yeah, it is on its burst and sustain numbers. While it looks high again, this is if it was always active, and it isn't always active. You aren't always at 100% crit chance, because that is what this is implying. You at the very least have to hit an enemy once without that up. But yeah, when we're headhunting, that is more the place for the Diamondback. Then also one that we have, of course, is the Doctor Home, but the Doctor, the Doctor should stay home. Although, even though it's not the most horrendous one, it is the M1A CQB at its core, and because of that, it does hurt its numbers a little bit, especially when we're losing also a bunch of bunch of its mods. And of course, the talent, well, useful isn't that useful. We end up using just, if you're going this, you might as well go healer or such. We just don't want to go this far down the damage numbers route. On the sustain end, we have, the UIC being actually pretty high, but what we see here is that, the M16 is still high up here. That's why I do use it here and there, but trying to extract the most out of it is sometimes a little bit tedious because, it isn't auto. If it was full auto, it would help a little bit, maybe, I feel. And then here, the Mark 17 and the 60 QB being pretty high up on the list here as well. Boomerang is a little bit higher here on the sustain end than it was in the burst end because it is helping out on the sustain end by just giving us some ammo back. So Boomerang is also a contender, definitely in the rifle category. But I would nowadays, especially with how good Killer is, I would lean much more towards that. Let's move on to the next one. As we come to shotguns, and in the shotgun category, we also have kind of the poster child of why not just to go just with burst? Because the double barrel shotgun and the sawed-off double barrel, both of those have a really high burst, way higher than anything else. That's also why the 100% point is actually on the SASG down here with Sadist, or with Brazen, one of the two. Down there, we'll see in a second. This is kind of the poster child where you just don't go with just burst, because this number looks very appealing until you look at the sustained DPS number and just go like, oh, those are horrendous. And these are very wide margins, and you will be way better off by just being in the middle with a much more consistent margin. So that's usually why, we don't just go off of burst. If we kind of scroll down and kind of go to that starting to discuss on burst and sustained DPS. Here on the burst end, the Super 90 and the SASG are kind of consistently and with different talents at the top here. Talent-wise as well, here, Sadist, we can definitely make work. I actually enjoy running, for instance, either Ridgeway or ODs with shotguns. I actually have both kind of versions of those. And that can work really well, especially against any faction that doesn't have anything that doesn't bleed, like Outcasts and Hyenas and such. When you're going up against Black Tusk with a one hand and mini tanks and such, it hurts a little bit more. But Sadist definitely can be triggered quite often, but we see also Brazen. Brazen is a really good pick as a general use one. I feel it is in this category for general use between Brazen and Killer, and then Sadist for if you are doing some bleed. Pummel especially as well. Here we have Pummel kind of with its damage always up. The thing with Pummel especially is, well, Killer and Brazen will have decent uptimes in most situations. Killer needing a kill, but Brazen still needing a shot at the very least. But also you need to you can't take long range shots much because you need those pellets to hit to get the stacks up there. Pummel needs 3 kills before it's activated, but when it activates, it also gives us a reload. So it is, again, the numbers are here, but you kind of have to make a value proposition on how much you think you're going to trigger this and how effective it is going to be because of that. But those are definitely the top picks here. I would say as well, Flatline can work. A lot of shotguns do have the long rail, but at that point, I would kind of lean more towards Brazen or such. Then weapon pick-wise, it's kind of these two. It's the SASG and the Super 90. All of their variants are pretty close to each other. The best SASG is the Black Market. As I'm blanking on the name of it, and I'm totally not delaying as I look into my stash and see Tactical Super 90 SPS is the best Super 90 overall. But also there's not much in between them. It's just a little bit of handling differences when you go between the variants on these ones. Those are my two top picks for just general use weapons. And the big difference between them is one is mag-based, the other is shell-based. So with the Super 90, you can, if you just go up to an enemy, fire 2 or 3 rounds, you can just reload those 2 or 3 rounds while you're running to the next enemy. With the SSG, you would reload the whole thing, but also quite often you want to reload the whole thing. And also, if you're reloading the whole thing, it's faster overall than the Super 90. So it depends between the two. They both have a standout named, of course, with Like Glue and Tsunami, with Perfect Pummel and Perfect Brazen. Both of these are really good picks. If you're going Pummel, the SASG, the Tsunami is kind of a no contest basically. And if you want to go Brazen, Like Glue is definitely one of the top picks. On the headhunting end, the M870 and the SPUS 12 are kind of the top picks in there. I generally pick the M870. It has a lot better handling than the SPUS, but also actually if you include its headshot mods, it is a little bit higher than the SPUS 12 on the first shot, but not on the cap shot, of course, because that is much more based on the base damage of the weapon. But yeah, the Like Glue and the Tsunami, really good picks in here as well. And then we have the ACS. The ACS is, of course, not getting used for its, just using it as a damage end of things, even though you can, especially putting Brazen nowadays on the ACS, on strikers or such, can make a very big difference. That's a really big damage increase over having, for instance, an lefty or such, where you might be using it for the sledge, but you might just move the sledge to the pistol, and yeah, an ACS with Brazen really makes a lot of sense there. But yeah, we're kind of using it there more for stacking, of course, which is a different thing, right? Most of the other shotguns don't compete well. I would say the 612 used to be one of the top picks. It really isn't anymore. The M870 is a really good headhunter pick, but yeah, things like the KSG and such really don't compete well. If we also look at the sustain end of things in here, we see that actually if we are triggering Pummel consistently, which is what some of these numbers are, with the RLD being for the reload plus the damage on the Pummel, the sustain can hop up quite a bit, but of course this is every 3 kills. So that's also why the 100% point here is on a sadist here. On the sustain then we see as well that the M870, just because of its decent reload and also, it's firing its shots slower than, for instance, the Super 90, it actually sustains pretty well and kind of does exceed some of the other weapons on sustain. And we also see actually here the difference, for instance, between a Super 90, which is Pummel, versus the Enforcer, because the Enforcer is, of course, a special case. It doesn't have that third stat, so it can't have Detox third stat. That drops you a lot of damage. That drops you a shit ton of damage. That's why the Enforcer actually isn't, for me, a contender, especially when the Tsunami kind of exists, just to have that tangent in here. And then, that's kind of also, top picks-wise, talent-wise. If we look at the exotics, here again, at the top, we see none. Because, there aren't very good damage talent ones. Here we have the Scorpio, kind of in the middle of the pack. This with the damage amp on it active as well. But most of the time you won't have that, of course. So if we kind of drop down actually to where the Scorpio actually sits, it's very far down, of course, because it's competing against damage talents that on much better weapons as well. The Scorpio being based on the 612 really took a big hit. And while it is still useful for certain situations, it isn't just the damage-dealing king anymore. To me, now it is really a secondary, and the main should be something else. Because you are giving up too much damage otherwise, but it is still a good secondary. If a name just pops out, you're in the summit, the name just pops out right next to you, you weren't ready for it, you can just pull out the Scorpio and much more consistently take that enemy down, because you're going to stun lock it basically into place. So the Scorpio still has a place. Sweet Dreams, Overlord, we can be brief. Neither really perform well. The Sweet Dreams at least can be used for some of the challenges during global events and such. The Overlord hasn't really been out of my stash, except just to play around with it here and there and just make fun of it, honestly. So let's go on to pistols. And in the pistol end, talent-wise, let's start there. Sadist, Killer, and especially Salvage can be pretty good picks for pistols if you're just using them. And we're using a build that is based around the Bulwark. This is the high-end pistol tech tank, which actually will get an upgrade and or has already gotten an upgrade. I haven't updated the numbers in here. I will do so in the future, but it doesn't per se really matter for shifting things around here. But it being a build, a tech tank basically, Streamline doesn't work out for me. I want to use my shield. I want to use a Bulwark. We are using our weapon not as a headhunter, basically. We're just firing it a lot. Kind of, the way you would just run any build, any DPS kind of build, where we're trying to just put out damage continuously. We're not per se hunting heads or such. For those, yeah, Killer makes a lot of sense, and Sadist as well can make just in the way in shotguns, running it with Ridgeway, for instance, or running it with a close range OD, can make actually for a decent builds. Streamline for me wouldn't work here because of I want to use the shield, so that kind of falls away. Then we have things like, for instance, yeah, we have the Orbit here with Perfect Finisher, or we have just generally Finisher in here. Now, Finisher, of course, you would much more use it in the way of shooting the enemy, killing them, and then swapping out to a main weapon. Here we're acting as if we're then swapping back to the pistol and then using it in that way, which of course isn't per se the way we would use it, but it's just to kind of illustrate how much Finisher can add. Same would be true, of course, for the Busy Little Bee, where we're kind of having it be with stacks here in the pistol, but you would normally just get the stack with the Busy Little Bee and then move on to a main weapon and use the stacks there. But yeah, especially Killer, having gotten a big buff, has made it my go-to for if I'm maining the pistol for some builds like this. And then, yeah, what we have as well is that here as well, we have kind of two weapons that are really close on burst, but they kind of differ a little bit on the sustain nowadays, especially. But since the reload changes, before that, M45A1 / tactical M1911, which are basically variants of each other. They have the same stats. The handling is a little bit in favor of the M45, but that's about it. The M1911 that is underneath them, that one's missing 3 mod slots, but actually, yeah, that's almost enough compensation to make up for it. But yeah, not quite. So in that case, yeah, I was kind of leaning towards M45s and such. But what changed was that the reloads changes came in, and the M45 actually didn't get much, and the Card 45 did. So nowadays, my go-to is the Card 45 because they're close enough on the burst end of things because, yeah, we're losing kind of 2.7% there, but we're gaining 13% on the sustain end. This is, again, one of those weapons where the burst is really close to each other, but the sustain is so much bigger of a difference. So I will rather take the weapon that are, you know, almost equivalent on burst, but then the sustain is so much better on this end. Because between these two as well, they handle actually quite similarly. Actually, I would I would say the Card 45 because, yeah, it was a later edition. This one is definitely a copy handling-wise of the M45s. There are some weapons that handle a little bit better in here. For instance, the X45 are a little bit more accurate and stuff, but yeah, we wouldn't want to give up that amount of damage. Then again, to say again, for instance, things like the Harvest. In this case, for instance, the Harvest, we would use it for Headhunter. That's a completely different, way of looking at things. We're mostly looking at the base damage of it. Here in continuous fire, yeah, the Harvest doesn't make too much sense if we're just kind of using it as a main weapon. But yeah, Headhunter, of course, yeah, Harvest and Regulus, of course. If you don't have a Harvest or Regulus, the 586 or 686, even though they're a little bit lower on numbers, they're the next best. And yeah, those are basically the same weapon. The 586 and the 686, they just are variants of each other, same base stats, but just a tiny handling difference between them. And those are kind of my go-to. I've been kind of going towards, yeah, I was kind of leaning towards the M45s until the reload changes happened, and now the Card 45 is very much my pick. But that is specifically also the Card 45, just a normal one, where you can have DTOC as the secondary. Because if we drop the DTOC and kind of try to find our first TDI card custom, is it this one with Sadist? Yeah. So here is the TDI card custom with Sadist. In this case, because yeah, we're losing that DTOC. We are gaining a skill tier, of course, which doesn't get represented in this. But yeah, versus that, if we're maining the weapon, yeah, the Card 45 with Sadist is way higher than it. If you're using that skill tier for something useful, because actually on most red builds, yeah, I'll be using a TDI card custom. I'll be pulling it out, especially if somebody goes down. I'll be pulling it out, tossing a hive. That hive has 2 charges while I'm holding the pistol. Once it's out of my hands, I can swap off the pistol. The hive will land with 2 charges. It will revive whoever's there, and then I can go and pick it up again. So that's, for instance, a tactic that we can use the TDI card custom for, which we can't do with any other weapon. So it has a thing that it does versus, for instance, a Card 45. So for instance, Orbit has a much higher, the finisher than other weapons. So if you're running finisher, Orbit makes a lot of sense. Those are definitely some of the better picks as well in here on the name end of things. But yeah, you shouldn't just stick a TDI card custom, especially if you're maining the pistol, which we're kind of doing with a build like this. Then exotic wise, yeah, we have the Busy Little Bee, but Busy Little Bee here is kind of, yeah, not perfectly represented because we would get the stacks and then, we would go to a different weapon, kind of like with Finisher. We wouldn't get the stacks and then swap off of the Busy Little Bee and then back. So it doesn't, this just kind of as a representation of how much it can add. The Liberty as well, while it can look decent, especially if we're body shotting a lot. The thing is, especially with these weapons, I'll be headshotting quite a bit. That would reset these stacks as it would eat it to heal the shield. And also the handling of the Liberty is horrendous in comparison to all of these other weapons. That's also why nowadays even, yeah, the D50, we don't even consider it at all. Base damage-wise, it's also below the 586 and the 686. So for Headhunter, we've basically all swapped to at least 586s, 686s, and much more preferred Harvests or Reguluses. Then also we'll have the Regulus likely a little bit lower here, but here we're just using the Regulus as just point fire kind of thing. We're not headhunting with it. That's not what the Regulus does. So this is kind of almost disingenuous almost of me. But if we were to use the Regulus in this way and we're just spam firing it, it still actually does okay because it is in the pack of some of the, for instance, if we had close and personal active on the M45s in a burst DPS kind of sense. So it is actually still performing decent, but that's mostly down to, yeah, it just hits really hard. The Mosquito, yeah, it does special things. We shouldn't really consider it as these numbers, because also without stacks, both the Busy Little Bee and the Mosquito really fall pretty far down. So yeah, when you're just shooting with the Busy Little Bee and not having stacks on it, or well, even if you have stacks on it, you need to swap off of it for those stacks to activate. But yeah, it's pretty low on the damage, and then same for the Mosquito. Then yeah, we were discussing earlier Salvage being one of the picks as well for pistols, and Salvage can make for a really good reload talent. It is actually, it triggers quite often. You do give up a ton of damage, of course, but yeah, there is some value there. But I still, especially with Killer nowadays existing, I lean more towards that. In the past, when it was competing, for instance, with Optimist and such, where it wasn't that big of an addition from the damage challenge, yeah, Salvage could be a go-to, but here, yeah. Because, for instance, if we're taking the reload away, basically, which is what Salvage, if it was always activating, would kind of be, then the M45 actually does beat out the card here pretty consistently, because now as well, the sustain, of course, has kind of been fixed up between the two. So yeah, Salvage definitely a contender here as well. Let's move it on to MMRs. And with the MMRs, we'll start here actually, where we have burst and sustain tables. This is on the base tables here. First, we'll discuss the weapons that can actually like fire full auto and get those out of the way, because generally we just don't use them that much. But in there, if you're considering using one, the Dread Edict and the SVD are kind of my picks for that. The Sacrum and basically the G28 and the SOCOM Mark 20, they just don't hold that well. The handbasket that got added, if you're using it in kind of a continuous fire kind of sense, it just doesn't compete, as it's just been balanced to a different degree. It is much more for headhunting than it is for trying to just continuously fire. That's what he can put out some decent numbers wise, but yeah, it's handling wise is kind of what hurts it. And we could kind of address the handling with a bunch of handling mods nowadays. And the SVD is also then the only one that can become accurate enough to kind of use in a full auto sense. Then for the rest of it, well, we have this base table here. Let's actually discuss it on the Hotshot one. And on this Hotshot one, we're just basically having a different conversation than DPS. We're having the first shot, the second shot, and the cap shot of the build kind of laid out here with the different weapons. And we're sorting by the first shot and then the cap. Now, this one is with the Chinkular plus Araldi backpack setup. In this version, what I have is two versions of it. One with Hotshot already kind of active and rotating. Basically, we're beyond the third or beyond the fourth shot on Hotshot, so it's kind of doing the rounds on every one of its talent components, actually triggering on each shot. Let's go down to this one, which is before that happens, because that's actually, I feel, a little bit more realistic. If we're comparing here, what we have is especially the White Death and the Model 700 on the other burst and sustain tables on the MMRs. Model 700 is actually on base higher than the White Death, but it isn't here, of course, because the White Death also has a component of headshot being higher. And once we account for that on a build, yeah, now the White Death is ahead on the first shot, and also just a tiny bit behind, because here the Model 700 does win out. But it is barely a difference. It is 0.16%. So these two numbers can be said to be the same, but especially on that first shot, the White Death is about 4.21% ahead. So that's an actual significant difference, and on the cap shot it isn't. So the White Death is generally my top pick for if we're just going all out on damage, especially with Determined. Keep in mind that here as well, we're keeping it to Determined. We're not considering other talents. If you are wanting to run other talents, or if you do run other talents, ones to consider especially are, Ranger, especially Ekim's long shtick with the Model 700, of course, will outcompete the White Death with a normal Ranger. What you can also go with, and a lot of people do, is running the spotting drone together with Flatline. That will spot things, or well, that will pulse things for you, so you can hit them with Flatline. Of course, Streamline coming in can be a really good pick as well if you're not using your skills, and will increase the cap significantly. Behind you is also a pick. And of course, kind of the exotics. The Mantis is definitely a general use one that works out well as well. But here we're kind of discussing again with Determined. That's what most people are interested in anyway, with especially the high-end discussion. Especially as well, this +5 weapon damage, just so you know what that is. That is integral mags on some of the MMRs. So all of the MMRs that don't have a magazine, detachable magazine, have actually, in that slot, you can put a 5 weapon damage mod. And of course, that will increase your damage by that amount. And that matters here, of course. So that's that. And that's not here with all of the magazine-based ones. The White Death is ahead on that first shot, and kind of the same on the cap shot as the Model 700. And because of that, that's kind of the go-to if you're just going for all-out damage. But there's something to be said for comfort, and especially the custom M44. The Model 700 Carbon, but not the Tactical. The underbarrel on the Tactical is just a crit chance slot. And of course, here that doesn't help out. You can't put accuracy or stability mods there. And because of that, it's basically just the Carbon. The SRS-A1 and Covert, and then also the SR1, and to a lesser extent as well, the Tactical True Rate. Those 6 are kind of in a really close pack with each other. As we kind of see here, if we kind of compare them all the way from basically this 96.34% down to this, especially the SR1, even still, the 94.42, that's less than 2% between them on the first shot, and that will also be the same on the cap shot. And Tactical True Rate is a little further behind, but also has a little bit more RPM. But also, as we go kind of down in damage, we go up, or we get better handling and reload speeds, basically. So it does actually help to, for instance, SR1 still competes pretty well, in my opinion, because it has a much better reload than, for instance, the custom M44. Of those, the custom M44 definitely has the highest base shot. That means also that I do sometimes leans towards it, because just having that magazine helps quite a bit, because now we have 10 or 12 shots to get that Hotshot to trigger and reload the magazine for us, instead of let's say the 7 of Model 7 or 5 of a White Death. So you will trigger that more often, much more consistently. And also, you can put more handling mods on them. Now, with one stability mod, most of these weapons already become swayless, at least on a full Hotshot with weapon handling everywhere else. But here as well, we can put an extra accuracy mod, which will help us as opposed to, for instance, the White Death or the Model 700, that will help it get more accurate quickly. So when we're, for instance, from moving around and then we scope in, how quickly it becomes accurate, that is dependent on accuracy. So we can actually have an extra mod going towards that on these weapons, because all of them kind of have an extra mod slot compared to the top 2 up there. But all of them are kind of so close to each other. It's basically which one do you like the look of, or do you like a little bit faster reload, maybe with the SR1, and then you lose a tiny bit of damage, but not in a real significant sense. So all of those are so close to each other that, yeah, it's up to you. Do you like one of the skins maybe for some of them? That might actually be more of a thing than, or the look of one, than actually making a realistic pick out of these. Because yeah, as the damage goes down, we do get some other benefits, especially the Tactical 308 is a really good handler. And the handbasket is also a very big pick for me, mostly because, yeah, it doesn't actually scope out in between cycling the round. So once you fire, it doesn't scope out, which all of the other bolt action MMRs do. It actually stays scoped in. And because of that, you can already, once you fire, you can already start moving the scope to the next target, have it ready on them, and then it is also actually auto. So if you keep the trigger down, it will fire as quickly as it can. And once in a while, you can do that like that and just go from target to target to target, especially with Determined. And that feels really good and makes for a really good weapon. And just not having that scope out really does make a difference. And it still has just barely enough damage. Even here with this Chinkler Araldi, you don't need the Habsburg version. You do need grade 25 though, which can take a while. But even with a little bit less grading, you basically, you need to go past, how much is it? 6.36 to kill a purple as a starting shot. And yeah, we're a little bit above that. So likely even grade 10, or you would likely need some grading, grade 10 or such. But yeah, the handbasket can be a really good pick there and has been one of my go-tos here. If we're discussing some of the exotics as well, the Mantis, especially when it's active. Now, of course, it's active when the target isn't targeting you. Then you get the bonus to it. Then it can actually, yeah, and especially on the first shot, that's very likely to happen. And that means also that on the first shot, it can even from a standstill, without any hotshot, pre-stacked on this, it can actually start on the elite right away, which is very handy. And of course, afterwards, yeah, you might lose a little bit of damage when it's inactive, because yeah, it does lose a ton of damage when it is in that state. But the Mantis, a really good pick, especially yeah, if you're not going Determined. Same for the Nemesis. Nemesis can do Nemesis things, and nothing can do what the Nemesis can. Not even Nema Bro or Nema Dad or Nema Mom. All of those are inferior to Nemesis. And yeah, when Nemesis does the things that she does, yeah, it is pretty interesting. But of course, it comes with its own bad sides. But yeah, it is definitely one of the topics. I quite often have a Nemesis on my back, especially for if I'm doing control points and we get rogues, because then if I have some Headhunter already sorted up, the first shot will kill the first rogue, the second shot will kill the second rogue, as long as I landed on the head, because yeah, we're not being assisted by Determined then anymore. But yeah, let's take it to the conclusion. And yeah, to conclude this pretty long video in the end, and one that I for a large part had to do twice, as I'll lift the veil here a little bit, and I had my audio device kind of give out on me, but I hadn't noticed. So I had some garbled audio, and I didn't realize until I reached the rifles and had to basically restart from scratch from that. So I've been doing a lot of talking, and it might actually, yeah, kind of sound that way in my voice. And yeah, that was a lot of talking, but yeah, I hope it was informative. I did want to go through all of these weapons and all of the weapon classes and kind of discuss all of my picks in there, because that's quite a common question. And nowadays then as well, I can just link to this video and go like, hey, go watch this video, just go watch the segment that you're interested in. Try to keep them brief, even though each segment, of course, in the end is like 10 minutes or such, because they're big. There's a lot of weapons. There's a lot of exotics. There's a lot of talents that we all need to discuss. But yeah, hopefully it was informative and it did help out. For future videos, we are going to go into the global modifier, and also I'm kind of spooling up for another masterclass, and we're going to redo actually the masterclass on Eclipse, on Fire Eclipse, as yeah, that one is from an age long bygone. The audio quality is pretty bad, the video quality is pretty bad, and also actually a bunch of the builds are out of date. So yeah, we'll go through that, redo it basically, put it up to modern standards, and yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. That'll be likely a few videos away though. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out, so do that a little bit of shilling. I hope you join me for future videos, and as always, have a good night.